Hey guys, Cody Bertrand here, and in this episode I wanted to take you through my guide to fall time cranking, take you through all the different kinds of crankbaits I use to break down each phase of the fall time transition, the turnover, all of that. It's going to be awesome. I hope you guys enjoy it. I think you're going to want to stick around. So coming into the fall transition, as we all call it, oxygen levels are changing, the turnover is happening, water temps are changing from low 80s to high to mid 70s. Fish are moving a lot. So when I'm faced with these seasonal changes starting to happen, I like to cover a lot of water. And one thing I really attack this with is a crankbait. I've got a couple different crankbaits that I attack each phase of the turnover with. So starting off, when that water is still pretty warm, I just like a square bill. I've got a couple different square bills I like to try based off of the size of the forage that's where I'm fishing, the water temperature, and what's really happening on that, what kind of cover I'm faced with as well. So what I'm really gonna start off with is like a 2.5 square bill. And this is gonna have a little harder wobble because the fish sometimes will be in a negative mood and you got to get them to react to bite it. So you got to be bouncing something off a cover. You got to be ripping it around. You got to be erratic with it and covering water. So that's what I really like to start out with, because a lot of times I'll be in the south or wherever they're going to be chasing that bigger bait fish, a gizzard shad sized bait, something like that. I'm going to want a little bit bigger square bill. But when you're faced with conditions where the bait's a little smaller, the water might be a little cleaner, you might want to downsize a little bit, I'm just going to go to a little 1.5 size square bill. That's going to get a little bit tighter wobble. You're going to be able to worm it through some cover a little bit easier, and you're still going to be able to cover that water, imitate the shad that those fish are chasing, and just really hone in on what kind of size they want as well. I've even gone now to a PH Custom Lures Little Hunter. It's a lighter crankbait. It's made out of balsa, and that's for when it's still pretty hot and you want to get up there super shallow, worm it through that cover. This is gonna get it done for you. You're gonna be able to worm it through all that shallow wood, whatever stumps in that 0 to 4 foot. This is gonna be what you want to pick up. And maybe you've been up there with a top water and they're just not really committing to it just yet. It's still kind of warm for that. Throwing a square bill up there will get you some bites when they really start moving around and they're spread out. So those are kind of how each square bill is a tool for me. Each crankbait is a tool. I use it in a different way to find different fish, cover different water columns, and get them to react in different ways on different cover. So that's why I really like to start my search with a square bill, because you're already going to have a percentage of fish that's up there shallower in that shallow water column. So that's why I like to start off with that. As we now transition into some cooler weather, now you're getting into late September, October-ish, even mid-September. It's going to vary wherever you're at in the country. So when that water temp starts getting into that high to mid 60s, I'm going to pick up something that dives 5 to 7 foot, because you're gonna have these fish start following their annual seasonal patterns of, a secondary creek channel might swing up against a deeper bank with a transition on it or something along those lines, a rock transition with a laydown or whatever. You're gonna want to have a crankbait that you can cover water with in that 5 to 7 foot, but it's still gonna be able to deflect off of the cover that you're gonna have at hand. So I'm gonna go with a DT6, and depending on watercolor, I'm gonna start with like a disco shad if that watercolor's kind of dingy but got some clarity to it, maybe a foot or two. That's gonna be and I believe this color is called the disco shad. That's really worked well for me, and it's a very versatile crankbait. You can do a lot of different things with it. Bridged corners. I can't stress how important bridge corners are. It's just something that groups these fish when they're on the move in the fall and in the spring. Like, I've really noticed these springtime fish and fall time fish kind of act alike. They set up in some of the same areas, and bridges are just something that will concentrate a lot of fish. It's a point of current. And so that's something I'm going to kind of bring off of the bridge corners and stuff like that as well. Some of the pilings if they're shallow, and you can definitely pick up a couple fish with that. But my bread and butter when you get those rains coming through, those fall time rains, kind of cools everything off. That first initial cool off, or when you got, maybe not even when it's cooling off. I've done really well when it's just got color to it, just enough color to it. I'm gonna pick up a fire tiger or like a chartreuse color crankbait, because I just think having that chartreuse giving off that glow in the water, and that it really does get them to react if they are in that negative mode. But even if they're feeding, I mean, they will crunch this thing. I think a lot of people have slept on the fire tiger color. I've had it work a lot of times in that pre-spawn and fall time transition section with a lot of smallmouth and some big largemouth down south. And some of the footage I'm actually showing me using this crankbait is down on Lake Barkley in Tennessee, and it's caught me some of the biggest fish I've ever freaking caught. And it's just my number one go-to tool for those conditions. Now we're coming into the colder, more transitioning into winter time. You're gonna be faced with really cold front, really severe cold snaps. It's gonna be, they're gonna be getting a little more lethargic. They've been feeding up for a while. Now they're just starting to kind of settle down. We're talking anywhere from when that water temp gets into the range of the 50s into low 40s is when I'm going to pick up a flat-sided crankbait. This is a PH Custom Lures Skinny P, and this has been my all-time, like 100% go-to for either super cold pre-spawn, but in that fall time when they start really transitioning into the wintertime patterns right before they go deep. I mean, these are very hard to beat. They have a tighter wobble to it, and like I was saying before with like the DT6s and square bills, I'm gonna mix up the color based off of watercolor, but when the water is still it's still pretty clean, and majority of the places you're at when you get into that wintertime season, you're gonna have cleaner water. And so I really like the Something Special color. I stick with that shad color imitation. I like having the chin, having a little bit of chartreuse on it. Just gives it a little more action and appeal to it. But it is a very tight wobbling bait. They're not willing to go after something. They're not gonna chase something a mile. They're not gonna chase something way down the bank, whether it's moving all kinds of crazy. They're cold, they're lethargic, they're in a negative mood. So bringing that flat side crankbait through there and having a tight wobble, it's going to take a lot of repeated casts sometimes too. So don't get discouraged if you go down through an area that it's your money stretch and you don't get bit. Like I've had instances where I've had to get this thing in there multiple times, sometimes get bit on my 5th, 6th, 7th cast. But it's just that mood that they are in. But this bait is how I utilize those scenarios. And when it gets cold or when it gets dirty and current situations, I'm gonna pick up a chartreuse, kind of blueback looking color, just because, like I was saying before, you're gonna want something that gives off a little more color, a little vibrant, and even if they are in that negative mood, it makes them bite. They're not gonna pass this up deflecting with that tighter wobble. They are opportunistic feeders, and they are going to take advantage of a meal like this. Even if the water temperature is in that 40s, you're bundled up, got like 5 layers of clothes on, they will still eat these flat-sided crankbaits. There's not many better ways, probably other than a blade bait, to get these fish to react when they are in those moods. So I hope you guys really enjoyed and kind of took something away from just a real quick. I wanted to walk you guys through how I utilize these baits, using them as different tools for different water clarity, different as that water temperature drops, and there's different phases of the fall transition. So having the right baits to combat each phase of the fall time transition is huge. and it can really pay off for you and get you some of the biggest bites of your whole year. Because you got to remember, these fish have been feeding for a couple weeks now. They're getting ready. They know the days are getting shorter. When they know, they can feel winter is coming. So they put on that fall feed bag, and it can be a lot of fun. So go check out PH Custom Lures. They got a great line of balsa crankbaits over there for just about every scenario you can think of. Check out 44 Tackle. Pretty much every crankbait I've talked about, you can find over at 44 Tackle. They got an online store, and if you guys are down there in Florida, they're out of Inverness, Florida. They got an amazing selection in-house, so check them guys out. And I hope you guys enjoyed following along, and stay tuned for the next one.